Welcome to Build Your Dream Business, brought to you by Solo. More than just a booking app, we're a community for independent pros in hair, beauty and wellness. I'm Katrina, here to bring you closer to real stories of success from the industry's finest and share practical advice to help your business flourish. At Solo, we understand the journey of working independently, and our goal is to connect, empower and inspire you. We're here to make sure that even though you work solo, you're never truly alone. In today's episode, we talked to Hayley Jepson, the Resilient Hairdresser. We discuss her journey from hairdressing to psychotherapy, addressing burnout, setting boundaries, and prioritising self-care. Welcome, Hayley. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me. I love a podcast.
Such a pleasure having you here. We're a huge fan of yours.
Oh, thank you.
Why don't you sort of kick us off by telling us about your journey into the hair and beauty industry?
I wasn't one of those people who was like wanted to be a hairdresser since they were 10. You know, like so many people I know always wanted to be a hairdresser, and that wasn't the case for me at all. I originally left school and went to college and did media studies and arts and English and all sorts of things like that. And then I didn't really love college. And so I dropped out and I got a job in a clothes shop. And then I went back to college the next year and pick some better subjects. That's when I started doing media studies, actually. But I'd kind of got a taste at that point for money. You know, I mean, hilarious when I look back. I was getting £100 a week. I found it really hard to go back into education. But around this time, I was having dreadlocks done, extensions, this company called Dome that were really popular in the, what are we talking here? Really early 90s. And I used to go to this place and have all these mad extensions and all sorts of crazy stuff like multicolored dreadlocks and things like that. And the people who did my hair were opening their own salon and they were looking for an assistant. And I was like, I'll do it. And I just thought to myself, this looks fun. These look like they're having a good time. I can be myself. I won't have to wear a uniform, which was my worst fear. I didn't like the idea of working in an office and I wasn't really loving college. And so I dropped out again and became an assistant. And so that's how I got into hairdressing. Very accident, like a really happy accident, but you know, it was not a big plan at all.
So joined your community that you already had there.
I was drawn to the fact that the people were fun and they were creative and they wore what they want. And this first woman that I worked for was bonkers. You know, she was very eccentric and she was a club dancer. And, you know, they introduced me to the world of clubbing and it was just all very exciting for a young creative person who I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was just really clear on what I didn't want to do, which was wear a uniform or work in an office. I sort of was really drawn to the fact that you could be yourself. That's what I thought when I went into hairdressing. And I think that's been true in the main, that you can be yourself much more than in lots of other jobs. So I was drawn to that.
Really cool. And then you eventually moved on to work at a big name like Toni and Guy. How was that different to the, smaller boutique salon that you worked in at the beginning?
Oh, it was a lot more organised. It was chaos, the first salon I worked in, but it was really fun. It was interesting, really, because I went to a day release college when I was at the first salon. And after a few months, they sort of said to me, I think you'd be better suited to a salon in the city centre in Manchester. Because this salon was in a small little area outside of Manchester. And I was travelling on 3 buses to get there, which was, ridiculous, really. But I just thought they were fun. And so college got me a placement in what I call a posh shop in Manchester. And it was old school, very old school, classic posh salon. And so I started working there first. And I worked there for a year and it was tough, because I couldn't be myself as much at this place. And then literally Toni and Guy opened 3 doors down a year later. And so I jumped ship and I went to Toni and Guy. And it was really different working at Toni and Guy than the other places I'd worked in, because this was what we're talking here about 1995. And Toni and Guy was the coolest place to be in the world then, and there was what I noticed the difference was the education I was getting was out of this world. the money that was being put into my education. And, I wasn't taken on as an assistant. I was called a varderer, which basically meant I just trained full time for a couple of years to get me to a good standard. So I didn't really do too much junioring for them assisting. It was more, I just did models day after day, and I was sent to London for weeks at a time at their training academies. So it was amazing. And it was interesting because when I went there, I wasn't sure I was going to stay in hairdressing. I was like, I don't know if this is for me. It's pretty hard, and getting bossed around and the hours were long and all of that. And then I thought to myself when I got there, oh, this is another level. You'd be foolish to just walk away from this without a better plan. And so I stayed, and, it panned out really well.
Incredible. You really worked your way up.
I was a kid, I wasn't making strategic decisions. I was just like, what do I like doing? I didn't have any responsibilities. And so I'm pleased I stayed because, I might not have done. I was bouncing around a lot at that time,
Incredible. Yeah, just sort of doing what feels good. So you really worked your way up at Toni and Guy. How long were you there for?
I was there 10 years and I worked in 3 different areas because there's a couple of salons in Manchester, so I worked at a couple of them. But I also worked at the salon in Brighton, and I taught in the academies in Manchester, and I taught in Brussels. And then I taught MVQ for Toni and Guy for a while as well. They had an MVQ academy in Manchester. And so I did lots. And so I worked full time in the academy. So I taught from the little ones up to people coming doing advanced training. And so I did all sorts for them,
And when you first entered the industry, was that kind of your goal to work your way up to a certain level? Or, was it still just that I just want to have fun and do something that feels good?
I was really led by my feelings. I mean, I still am to some degree, but, like I say, I was young. You look back, you feel like you're really old when you're 18, 19, 20. But when I look back, I just laugh my head off and think, God, I was a baby. Like I moved to Brighton because I wanted to move out of Manchester. And it was really good at that time because you just rang head office and said, where needs a technician, and then you just were like, oh, great, I'll go there. And so that's really how I bounced around a little bit. But when I became a hairdresser, I just thought I would cut and colour hair. That was my experience of it. And when I got to the posh shop in Manchester, the one before Toni and Guy, they did cutting and colouring separately. And I'd never seen that before. That was really how it went in the more high-end salons in them days. And the technicians were more fun than the stylists. I thought the technicians were funny women. And so I decided to become a technician so I could work with them. And then when Toni and Guy opened, they needed some technicians. And so I was sort of asked to go and work there. My friend had already got a job there as an assistant, and they must have been looking for technicians. And he said, oh, my friend does colour. She's just up the road. And so they asked me to come in for a chat. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure I really want to be a hairdresser anymore. And then I thought I'd give it a go. I'd give it one last ditch attempt. And then, like I say, I was sort of blown away with the training that was being offered to me.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of decades later, you're still in the industry, no sign of wanting to leave.
I feel that choosing to become a technician, a colour technician, which wasn't cool in them days, like it's cool now to do colour, but it really wasn't. In the 90s, you were like a second-class citizen as a technician. It was all about the stylist. But it was one of the best decisions I ever made because I was always like gold dust because there was not a ton of technicians around, there was always loads of stylists. And so it served me really well. It made it easy for me to move around and get jobs.
I mean, obviously, with that meaning to or not meaning to, you did kind of, graft and carry on working your way up. At what point did you kind of stop and think this is actually causing me to burn out, a subject that you talk about predominantly in your work now?
I'd moved back from Belgium and I was working in an independent salon in Manchester with some friends who'd opened a salon. And I was really busy there, really successful. It was a great salon, really fun. I worked there for 10 years, but probably about 5 years in, I started to think, this is too hard. The way that we're working is not good for my mental health. Things were very different than they are now. Sometimes I talk to assistants now and I talk to them about what it was like when I was an assistant, and they're just like, why would you stay? And I was like, it just was different. It was a different culture. You worked hard, you played hard. It was tough love. That's how it went. But it doesn't really fly anymore, that kind of leadership. But, you know, that's how I was trained, and I just carried on. And I was struggling with my mental health. In hindsight, it was a combination of loads of things. You know, I'd always struggled with my mental health since I was a teenager. And I think that's a lot why I was feelings led on what I did, because I just wanted to feel better. That was it. You know, all the time I wanted to feel better. So I made decisions on wanting to feel better. It's why I moved. It's why I worked with the technicians. Did you see what I'm saying? It's like I was really feelings led, and the culture that I was working in made it worse because I just didn't have a minute to think. And so I was exhausted, working a lot of hours. And so these two together were unmanageable for me. And so I got a therapist. That's what I did. And I had a therapist for a couple of years, and that was great. And I felt better, but I still didn't feel better in my job. I thought to myself, I can't do this for the next 40 years. How I'm living is unmanageable.
You can see how it's so easy to fall into that trap. You know, you seek out something that, you know, keeps you busy so you don't have to think. And then the real problem is that you don't have time to think and you can't stop. So it's just this wheel.
At the time, I was just unhappy, you know, and I was looking for an exit strategy. And I had some therapy for a couple of years, and I found it fascinating that it helped me. You know, I was like, isn't it mad that works? Going talking to someone for an hour a week, isn't it crazy the difference that makes? And so I really got interested in psychology beyond myself. And so I started talking to my therapist about how you became a therapist, and decided to become a therapist, you know, again, feelings led. I just thought I can't be a hairdresser for 40 years if this is what it's like. It's too hard. And my body was hurting, you know, my back was terrible. It's been terrible since my 20s. I wasn't looking after myself physically at all.
This is it. Like, as well as, you know, the sort of mental load, I think people often forget like how much of a physical job hairdressing is. It's
standing up for 9 hours a day. And what's really interesting is people have said to me, loads of hairdressers that I worked with years ago who were stylists, who've become technicians later in life or started doing colour as well for one reason or another, have all messaged me and said, oh my God, my back is killing now. I do colour. And I think what happens when you're a colourist is you stand still more. When you're a cutter, you move little steps constantly. But when you're a colourist, you stand still.
And then the mental load of, you know, not being physically in the right shape you need to be in to carry on doing your job to the high standard, that affects you as well. So it's just all connect.
I think like when you go into hairdressing, no one tells you the stuff that's going to be hard about it. You just think this is going to be fun. I'm going to chat all day and make people look nice. And there's no warning about what's going to be hard. And so what I found was when I did find things hard, I thought it was just me because no one was talking about it, you know? And so one of the reasons I do what I do and I talk about it so much is because I want to normalize the things that are hard about hairdressing so people don't feel like it's just them.
I think especially for, you know, our, you know, solo members and our listeners, you know, when you are a self-employed professional and you are spending all of your time, perhaps not in a salon, but working on your own, you don't have colleagues that you can chat to and share those experiences with. So, you know, services like the ones that you offer are so important for that sense of community and making people feel heard and making them understand that, no, you're not alone, which is something that we really sort of try to hammer home, that, you know, there is this whole community of self-employed professionals that are in the same boat as you.
Exactly that. I think there's some things that are really hard about working for yourself, you know, in like a freelance way, when you're maybe going to people's houses or whatever. You start to build more intense relationships with your clients. And sometimes just because you need a chat, you know, but if you imagine, if you're working too long hours, you don't see your friends, you're not getting the chat there. And so you start having more personal chats with your clients and it can become more intense. And then they start having more personal clients. And I think all of this can add up to it becoming really heavy. So I think working too long hours can affect you in ways that you've never thought of.
Yeah. So another thing with, you know, building those super, super close relationships with your clients, because there is always that one-on-one relationship. A lot of our solo members have fed back that actually affects how much money they make, their pricing. They kind of fed back that due to those close relationships, they feel like they can't increase their prices. You know, sometimes people say, I feel like guilty for charging someone because I've just had such a close chat.
It's like charging your mom. You know, if everyone's your friend, that's not a business, is it? You know, it's interesting. And I talk about this a lot in loads of my courses, actually, is that when you consider all your clients your friends, this will hinder your business and your mental health. You'll find it harder to enforce boundaries. You'll find it harder to increase your prices. All of that just becomes really tough because the boundaries become very, very blurred. And it took me a really long time to realize that I was very friendly with some clients, but they weren't my friends. And I mean that in the nicest way possible. These are lovely people. But when I stopped hairdressing, I didn't see them anymore.
How do you kind of advise approaching, you know, that pricing question when it comes to, you know, there's a cost of living crisis, everybody's bills are going up, you do need to increase your pricing. How do you kind of advise approaching that?
Well, I think you should put your prices up when you need to. I think investing in a smart pricing calculator is really smart. I think that sort of thing is vital, instead of just having a guess what your prices should be or sticking £2 on, you know, all that sort of thing that we do. I just think all that's crackers. So really figuring out what your prices need to be so you're making a decent living, for one. And then I think you need certain infrastructure in your business to come across as more professional, which then puts the boundary in. Because if you're just texting every client, hi, Janet, the price is going up. Oh, really sorry. This doesn't work. Whereas if you've got an email list, you know, something like that where you can contact them, you can just send out an email in one go that just says, you know, hi, folks, as is from the 1st of July, there will be a price increase. Thanks for your custom. Any inquiries, you know, just ask. When you speak to everyone, when it's something more business-like wise, it's just easier. But when you've got to text 80 people and stuff like that, it becomes unmanageable. And so I think that putting a little bit of tech distance between you and the difficult conversations really helps, because people can't just be texting you constantly and then they start to think that they're your friend. But I think you've got to start thinking about people as clients you're very friendly with.
I love that idea of tech distance. That's so true. You know, it's kind of the bit that turns, you know, that kind of friendly relationship, which is great if it's friendly, into a business relationship.
Yes, all of that.
I mean, because of all of these factors that we just discussed, obviously burnout appears to be a huge theme, like, you know, reading through those Facebook professional community groups, things like that. What strategies would you advise professionals to implement to kind of prevent burnout? Is there like 3 things that you would advise for them to do?
What you've got to remember is when you're self-employed, you are the boss. Don't become the worst one you've ever had. And so, you know, choose hours that work for you. I hear so often people say stuff like, oh, everybody wants to come in the evening. And I think that when you're building your business, you might do things like weekends and out and evenings. But let's say 10 years in, when you've built your business, that might not suit you anymore. You've got kids. You want to pick them up. You want to go watch their football in the evening or whatever. And you want to spend time with your family at the weekend. I think if you market yourself in the right way, when you're already busy, you can pivot into doing the hours that really suit you. Because when you choose hours that suit your life, you're less resentful and less miserable, you know, because it's really annoying when you feel resentful of your clients because you're there doing something late on a Wednesday and you really don't want to. Create a job that works for you. That's probably why you went self-employed, was so you have a bit more freedom. But we sometimes then create the worst business ever. I think if it doesn't have to be you, don't do it. And so I think once you get a little more successful and you've got a bit of money behind you, you know, don't clean your own house, folks. Get someone else to do it. You know, like outsource some responsibilities that I ask myself daily, does this have to be me? And there are certain elements to my job now that don't have to be me. So I have a virtual assistant. She does lots of bits of techie stuff that kill my brain. So I can do stuff that's my zone of genius, you know? And so I think about that. And sometimes I think you should outsource, but it's not always outsourcing in your business. It can be more outsourcing at home to reduce the responsibility somewhere. You know, if you're heading towards burnout, you're doing too much for what you can manage at that time in your life. And it changes, you know, when you're 20 and when you're 40, life's different. And if you're still operating under the rules you set up when you were 20 as a hairdresser, it's probably not going to be much fun. But I also think always make sure you're charging appropriately. You know, there's nothing that makes people feel more resentful and fed up than when you know you're not really making enough money. All of that adds up to burnout, you know, not charging enough. It leads to burnout, working long hours. But also I would be really mindful about the sort of conversations you're having with clients. And I would try and keep it light as much as possible. I didn't used to think that. I used to initiate very deep conversations with clients when I was working one-on-one. I look back and I think I was desperate for a bit more depth and interest in my life, but I was working so much I couldn't get it in my real life. So I started looking for it at work. And that created problems because the conversations were getting more and more therapy-like. And I wasn't a therapist, you know, as a hairdresser. And even when I was both, it's very hard to do them both together and I didn't want to. And I'd be very mindful of the culture you're creating in your space, you know, because sometimes in your life, there's going to be really hard things going on. There'll be loss, grief, divorce, sick kids, all sorts. And when you've created a culture that people can come and offload on you, you're going to really regret it in those times. And so I think if you want a bit more depth in your life, find it in your life, but don't look for it in your clients.
Yeah, I think that's such a great takeaway. You know, you've become your own boss. Don't become the worst boss you've ever had. Like you're saying, you're creating your working culture. You know, there isn't somebody above you that's in charge of culture in your organization. It's you. It's up to you.
And I speak to hairdressers all the time and they feel so powerless, but they have all the power. If you're stressed because you've got so more clients than you can cope with, this is stressful, but it also means that you've got options. You know, it's different when you're building a business and you feel like you've got to say yes to everyone. But when you've built your business, you really have got some options. You do hold some power and you will lose a few people who can't come evenings. But if you've got more clients than you need anyway, be okay.
Do you think it's like a self-confidence thing of, you know, people being scared that the clients won't come? I'm not good enough.
Yeah. It's not happening to you. You can control this. But it's so interesting how, I mean, I've totally felt like this and people say it to me every day. They feel like the clients are in charge.
Yeah. It's you. You're the product. Your skills are the product. They won't come to you.
Mm-hmm.
There can also be this kind of fear of negative feedback of, you know, you putting your foot down and saying, this is my business. I'm making these changes. I'm not working Wednesday afternoons. I'm putting my prices up. What's your advice to professionals kind of fearing something negative being said to them and kind of how to handle that?
If you're polite and you're grateful, you know, and the way you word things and how you communicate matters. Some people, when they're scared, do daft things like just put it up on their stories on Instagram. And how offensive for someone who's been with you for 20 years. You know, like, I think there's ways we can communicate well and respectfully and end the relationship well. You know, I ended my relationships with my hairdressing clients really well. I was just like, you know, I'm out. I mean, I said this in a really nice way, but I was like, thanks so much. Here's who I recommend. You know, there's ways of doing it. And I think there's always going to be people who are going to take the hump and who are rude. And, you know, and I think we can't control that. And I think these people are in the minority, particularly if you're really mindful of your communication. If you give someone a solution, they're less likely to be angry. You know, sometimes it's because you just say, I'm not working Wednesdays, I'm putting my prices up. And Janet's thinking, what am I going to do now? Whereas if you tell her what her options are, she can do now, she'll be less mad. I think when people are new to putting boundaries in, sometimes we can be a bit overzealous, actually. I call it the overcorrection. You know, you have years of having no boundaries, and when you decide you're getting some, you sort of put your foot down in a slightly aggressive way. But then eventually, you know, we come back to the middle where it's flexible boundaries and, you know, we hone our communication.
Yeah.
This is why having a community really mattered, because when you work on your own, who's going to read your message and be like, yeah, that's all right, send it. You know, do you know that kind of thing? You need other people who walk in your shoes every day to bounce off, like your partner and stuff and your sister. They don't know half the time. They don't understand what it's like to do what we do. And so I think community matters so much.
Massively. And I think with a lot of our listeners, we have a few members that are kind of just starting out in their journey. I know that I've spoken to a few people who have had career changes. I suppose you had a kind of reverse career change. Can you tell us a little bit more about, moving from hairdressing to psychotherapy? Were there any kind of fears involved in that? What was it like taking the plunge?
I wasn't scared. I was excited, I trained for 4 years. That's how long it takes to become a therapist. And I did that while I was working full time behind the chair. So it was a lot. So I was burnt out, exhausted, and I took more on because I wanted an exit strategy, But when I eventually did leave hairdressing, I left altogether. I left the salon I was in, and I started out with a job in a sixth form college. So I was working with 16 to 19-year-olds, which is basically assistant age. So I was well versed in this age group. I love teenagers. And then I had a private practice a couple of evenings a week where I saw private people, grown-ups mainly. But again, that turned into teenagers because people started to realize I was great with teenagers. And so other therapists would send me their clients' kids.
Oh.
And so I basically became a young people's therapist mainly, just because I was good at that. And I like teenagers, and a lot of adults was quite scared to work with teenagers. A lot of therapists were like, I can't cope with them. And I was like, these are my people. I love them. I was excited, I was excited. It felt good. I was really excited to use my brain in a different way. It was brilliant that the very expensive training was paying off and I had a job, and I did it for 5 years. But it was interesting. I still had a couple of people whose hair I did in the kitchen because they never let you leave. There was still a couple of friends. So I still kept my hand in. But what was interesting about being a therapist is once the sort of novelty wore off, if you like, I started to find it quite lonely work. When I started to try and find more depth in the conversation with my clients because I needed more of that in my life, you can't do that with therapy. But I was having lots of deep conversations, but not for me, for them. And it started to feel quite heavy, and I realized I needed more balance, and I just thought to myself, eventually, I'm not sure working one-on-one as a therapist with people every day is going to pan out brilliantly for my mental health. And so it was a funny time, really, when I was like, what am I going to do? Because I thought, I don't think I'm going to be able to be a therapist forever. And I was nervous of going back into hairdressing for loads of reasons, but really my back was hurting and stuff like that. But I did go and do a day of hair for a friend to help them out because they needed a colorist. And I was surprised that I liked doing hair because when I left, I was like, see ya, I'm never coming back. And so I did both for a while, and that was better. The balance of the two was good, but it became hard for my brain after about a year to manage both of them because they're both really hard in different ways. And so I made the decision to go back into doing hair full time.
And of course, with a whole new toolkit of how to manage the mental health challenges of hairdressing.
All of that. And, first of all, just mine, that was great. Just managing my mental health as a hairdresser and realizing I was doing a much better job. And then I started to reflect on what was different this time. And I just realized that everything I'd learned as a therapist was so useful to me as a hairdresser, and that it would be useful to other people who were hairdressers. That's when the thoughts for starting the Resilient Hairdresser started to percolate. I wrote a course and tried it out on a few friends. I was like, what do you think? And they were like, it's really good. And they were like, I've never heard anything like this before. And so that's how it was born, really.
So what are you offering right now?
I do a couple of workshops, and I come to salons and work with teams as a whole, and I do a couple of courses on managing your energy and managing your mood and stuff like that. So they're great for team building. If you work on your own, if you're a solo person, I run a course called Burnout and Boundaries a couple of years. And this is really like my signature course, if you like. Most people that follow me have done it. It's the big course that people do because whether you're employed or self-employed, a salon owner, an educator, whatever, it's relevant. I mean, if you're a plumber, it works. It's just that I talk about burnout and boundaries through the lens of hairdressing. And so that's really my most popular course. And I run that online, like I say, usually twice a year. And that's all about how to get out of burnout and stay out and figure out what boundaries you need and how you're going to enforce them. So that's my big one. And then I do one-to-one coaching. You can just book an hour with me and come and talk to me. I have a membership, which is great, called the Resilient Hairdresser membership. And there's all sorts of people in there, freelancers, educators, salon owners. In the main, it's hairdressers, but there are some beauty people because it's all the same. It's all the same issues, you know. If you're working for yourself or you're struggling with your boundaries, but if you're doing beauty or hair, it's the same thing, really. And so I have a membership, which is great. And I love that. It's a really nice community where people find support. And I teach a class once a month for the members live, and that's great. So I love my little community. It's brilliant. And I teach leadership as well. I have a leadership course, and I'm going to be teaching that live at the L'Oreal Academy later in the year. And I'm working on an ADHD course.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, an ADHD course for hair and beauty people to help with managing ADHD. So many of us in the creative industries are discovering we've got ADHD. I got diagnosed last year at the grand old age of 48. And I realized in hindsight that a lot of the reason I was burning out was due to my ADHD. One of the biggest symptoms of ADHD is constant burnout. So I realized why I'm so obsessed with burnout, but I didn't know, you know, before that it was because of ADHD. And so I'm testing that out at the moment.
Oh, right.
Yeah, all sorts of stuff.
How do you kind of now, after everything you've learned, and I should imagine continue learning every day, how do you create boundaries between your personal and professional life?
I got really good at that as a hairdresser towards the end. And then when I first became an educator, I found it hard, like new level, new devil. It was different. And I'm working from home and I found it really hard to stop. Whereas now I learned the hard way again of what doesn't work. I have finishing time, you know, like today, you know, I'll be doing quite a lot of work on my computer and I sort of decide what time I'm going to finish. And I just be like, yeah, by 5, I'm done. I'm going to stop, check in on my social media, and then I'm done. And I don't work weekends. Like when I first started as an educator, I would find myself doing stuff on Saturdays and Sundays. And I eventually made a decision that's not great for my brain. It's not great for my social life. So I have rules and I follow them, you know, and sometimes I work evenings though. You know, I do lives and education in the evening. And so when that happens, I don't work in the day as much. I take my time then and I do stuff for my self-care most mornings. You know, there's stuff that I do for myself. I start my day out the way that suits me. And I really spend my time, Katrina, managing my energy. That's how I always think about things. I don't book things by time. I think about how much energy it will take me to do something.
Oh, nice.
I think about things in how much energy will that take? How will I feel when I've done that? And so I book my days appropriately around that.
I love that. I'm taking that away from myself immediately. I know I'm definitely guilty of, you know, look at things like this is going to take 2 hours, this is going to take 4 hours. At the end of the day, you're like, but energy wise, it can be completely different. You know, a task that takes you however long could actually not take down your body battery as much, you know?
Yeah. And if I say travel to London and teach a course for the day, I'm going to need a day off the next day. Or I'm going to need a day where I can sit in my pajamas and just answer a few emails. That's all you're going to get. When I look at my diary for the week and the month and even the day, I'm looking at how much energy. So I know certain jobs take more energy than others. And so I'm always managing that. It's not like there's an hour free, shove something in. And I think you can think about that as a hair or beauty professional. Certain tasks and certain jobs take more energy. And so maybe you don't book so many of the same thing in on one day, if they're jobs that require a bit more brain power.
Yeah. And I think for our self-employed professionals, you know, it's not, you can think of it in those terms because you do wear so many hats. You know, you've got to manage your social media and your marketing and things like that. So
yeah, when you're going to do that, are you actually going to put some time in or are you just going to try and squeeze it in, you know? So all of that stuff.
And thinking of, you know, all of those little tasks you have to do in terms of how much energy that takes up.
And some stuff will take me loads of energy, you know, due to my ADHD, like admin. Oh, Lord, that takes some serious energy. It takes me more energy to go through my email list than to do a podcast.
Yeah.
I find this quite energizing, whereas sitting down doing admin, I find quite draining.
This is a question we ask at the end of every podcast. If there's anything that you wish that you knew that you could tell yourself at the beginning of your journey, what would it be?
That you've got to look after yourself as a priority. I wish someone had told me. I wish I knew that earlier. I wish I knew that I needed to look after my body, my finances, my social life, my mental health, all that stuff. I wish I knew I needed to work and do all those things. I didn't even know it was a thing. It's like, it just wasn't on my radar, that sort of stuff. And so I wish I'd known that looking after myself as a priority would really matter to my success.
So important. Well, thank you so much, Hayley. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. So many incredible takeaways, and I can't wait to implement in my own life. So thank you so much.
Good. Let me know how that goes.
Absolutely. Such a pleasure, Hayley. Speak to you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favourite podcast app. If you like the episode, why not leave a review or share it with a beauty industry friend? And if you're curious about Solo, you can download it for free on the App Store or Google Play and take advantage of our free trial.